Hello, friends. Welcome to the Big Talk. We have talked about the power of story on this show for 18, 19 seasons. And we are talking about the power of story when we share our story. We all know that sharing our story can change and even save a life. But what about the life of the storyteller? On this season, we are diving deep into how sharing our personal story can change and even save our life. I am so excited to welcome our featured guest today, the incredible Kimberly Pendleton. Kimberly, are you ready to drop in?
I am so excited to be here. Yes.
Kimberly Rose Pendleton, PhD, is a high-performance intimacy leadership coach for entrepreneurs who are ready to lead with love. Kim helps powerful leaders heal their intimacy wounds so they can show up in their relationships and businesses at their highest level. Kimberly's expertise comes from her training as a PhD at George Washington University after receiving her master's degree from Yale, and she's also a certified coach and a published researcher. Her company, Uncover by Kimberly Rose Pendleton, PhD, is a multi-six-figure business that has helped hundreds of clients heal their relationships and intimacy wounds so they can experience incredible success, deep love, and powerful presence. Kimberly, take a minute to fill us in on anything I missed and talk a little about you.
Just listening to that, I was like, wow, it feels so amazing to be able to think about all the stories that went into each piece of that bio and all the ways that all the parts of us are woven into who we show up as. It's just so kind of humbling to think about each story by story. But yes, that was perfect. I am so delighted to be able to talk with everyone now at this point in my journey where it feels like things make so much more sense than they have at other points on that storyline. And I am now in California. I was in Washington, D.C. for a decade and starting a new chapter out here with my family and kittens and just soaking up the California sun.
We are so glad that you're here with us today. And something that I want to share with our listeners and our viewers that we have in common is that you help clients heal their relationship and intimacy wounds so they can experience incredible success and powerful presence and all of that. So many of my speakers come to me with these wounds, with these hurts, with these traumas. And by talking about it, sharing the story, and when it comes to speaking, you have to be ready. You can't just talk about it when you're raw. But it's really the same sort of intimacy that you are sharing with your clients. That kind of deep connection is so powerful. When you became clear, Kimberly, that you needed to tell your story in order to be able to do the work you're doing, what was that moment? When was that moment? And how did you work through that moment?
That is such a powerful question. And I really correlate the moment and process of owning the storytelling piece of the healing with when there was this outward success as well. And I'm sure that so many of your clients experience that too, that there was almost a piece of us that is still holding back before we're ready to tell the story. And then once it's let out of the cage, it just invites so many more people to join in. And that has meant, especially for someone like me who works as a coach, it's meant just like my business was able to explode. So I can think of one moment in particular where I really said yes to the storytelling piece. And I had been so resistant, especially because, maybe everyone feels this way about their particular story, but I felt like, oh, this one's a little sensitive. Like, this is a little tender. What are my parents going to think if I'm suddenly talking about intimacy all the time and wounding and even trauma, I had this feeling almost like I wanted to protect people that loved me from my own trauma and my story. Is my story going to hurt anyone's feelings? And I was working as a coach. I was finishing up my PhD. Everything was at this realm of nice. It was like nice to work with me. I was helping people bit by bit have like a nicer life. But I knew, and I think most people around me did too, knew that there was more depth that could be accessed. And I made this decision when I was in kind of like a funny situation with someone copying some of my work. And I realized in order to create work that was uncopyable, I had to start telling my own story because no one else could have that. And it was this funny, almost indignation that led to telling more of the truth, where I was willing to go deeper because it meant that it would be so uniquely me. And then that was what really helped all of it blossom in a way that was just so powerful.
That's so awesome. And it also touches on that moment where you had courage. And the courage was directly related to somebody stealing your work, right? So
Yeah.
why do we have to wait to the point where it becomes that kind of a confrontation before
Right.
we have the courage to share our personal truth? How would you inspire our audience and our listeners today and your clients to get to that point where they need to share their personal truth for another reason? And what would that reason be?
I love that question. Yeah, like how could we let the promise motivate instead of avoiding this pain or whatever is feeling scary? I think that looking back, that invitation to tell more of my story was always there. And I think that in a way, I might have been worried that it might alienate people to go too into my own details around my, like maybe my divorce or my healing or finding love again or anything like that. It felt so particular to me. But I would encourage all of us to realize that even when the particulars are different, people can so identify with the details of our story. And they actually wanted to know, what twilight looked like at my apartment when I lived alone, and what each kind of therapy session as I was healing from trauma felt like. And that even if their details are different, the very humanness of it comes through. And as you tell your story, you're giving people permission to see their own and to connect with yours. And it doesn't have to be later after you've tried like everything else, really the way I did. You can be so honest and vulnerable from the beginning and really give everyone permission to be living their story too. And maybe even identifying with pieces of yours that you never would have thought would connect because they feel so specific to, to us when we're living it.
You touched on divorce and trauma and therapy and what your apartment looked like when the sun was setting alone. That's a lot of beautiful communication right there. I would love for you to go into that a little bit deeper and why those shares were important as a storyteller and as somebody who is meant to serve by sharing a story.
Yes. I mean, one of the pieces of the puzzle that was so big for me, and that I have really found was important in telling any version of my story, was about growing up with a bit of good girl conditioning and really wanting to always be good. And each of those little vignettes in my memory, whether it was leaving a marriage, and it turned out leaving a church while I left the marriage, they were sort of a package deal, I learned, and being alone and healing from trauma, they all rubbed up against that identity of just goodness and following the rules and doing the right thing, the predictable thing. Good girls didn't get divorced or live alone, and they didn't talk about these personal details. And so, in that way too, storytelling can be this identity reshaping process, I learned, because being the one who talks about these things was a whole new side. But when I think about what work each did, especially around trauma, I learned that the bridge that you could offer and create as you tell your story around what happened. And I know we saw this on such a wide scale with the Me Too movement, just the power of someone else's story to make you feel like you hadn't made it all up, like you weren't remembering wrong, like what was happening to you didn't not make sense or anything like that. Even if every piece was different, that there was just such comfort in that feeling of not being alone. And then maybe also such inspiration in listening to these other people share, when you know that it was difficult, but like witnessing that courage, the courage of storytelling to really make it feel like you could do that too. So powerful.
Thank you for sharing all of this, Kimberly. I love that you are so vulnerable. I mean, you are an intimacy expert. So it's clear to me why you are in this field. And it's also so clear to me that when you stepped into sharing your personal story and the details, you became free.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. It was like unlocking the bird cage and like flying out. Yeah, absolutely.
What kind of style, communication, coaching, direction do you provide, safe space, do you provide for your clients in order to get them to tell you their story? Because they have to tell you their story in order to heal and to connect with each other, right? That's what intimacy is all about. How do
Yes.
you get them to do that?
I love that question. And I think this is, again, a place where our work overlaps in such a beautiful way, because there is such a vulnerability in letting all those parts of ourselves out and be seen and be exposed, and such a core intimacy wound around rejection. Like, well, what if I show someone this part of me and they don't like it? Like, I want to just keep it all hidden. So I think that work around first, getting intimately connected with ourselves, letting ourselves tell the story to ourselves first, and getting even fluent in the language of our own story. And then from there,
That,
being willing.
that pause you, Kimberly, because that was so powerful. Just going to repeat that for the listeners.
Yes.
Becoming fluent in the language of our own story. Let's just sit with that for a second. Brilliant.
I love talking to you so much. This is what comes out when you're talking with a powerful storyteller. You start telling more powerful stories yourself. And you know what? I think that is actually one of the next pieces, is the way that we model. And so I think one of the unexpected, but now to me completely reasonable pieces of the process is being willing to be vulnerable myself, and trying not to spill all over clients or my spaces, but to really show up and be an example of authenticity and vulnerability and integrity, in that sense of, like, I'm going to tell the truth and show you that I didn't die. Here is my story, and look at what connection it's making possible, because I'm owning this and I'm allowing you to see it. And from there, even in my relationships, even in my client work, what the power is of that possibility of connecting to the real me and the real them, and being willing to be kind of available for whatever that's going to bring up. And I think that that third piece then becomes cultivating self-trust. And I'm sure that that's such the process with your speakers as well, because if you can trust yourself to be with whatever will happen when you tell this story, it changes. You know, nothing can hurt you, even if things do hurt, or something does react in a way that feels prickly or painful, or that your truth does cause ripple effects that change the status quo. But if we can trust ourselves to be with it, and to be with the fallout, and to also be with the magic that could come, you know, you become unstoppable.
That's so powerful. Kimberly, we touched a little bit on the fear of what other people think. And
Yes.
this comes up a lot with my speakers. If I tell my story, what will other people think? Or if I tell my story, will I hurt my family? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I know that there are a lot of speakers and human beings out there who are not sharing their story because of these fears that make sense. However, I'd love to hear from you on this.
I am obsessed with this question. It's so, so powerful. And I see it in ways, I'm sure you do too, that you almost wouldn't expect, like clients who are afraid to even, you know, share a little moment of delight, like on Instagram, something that seems maybe so innocuous, but there's this fear of judgment. What will people think? And then, of course, the big ones too, when my clients are working through processing sexual assault or deep heartbreak or even money fears, and just so concerned about, especially parents, you know, how will they feel to see that I have been in pain, in so much pain? And then, of course, if they're angry, you know, like, how will it feel to read about how upset I am at our family or anything like that? And I have had all of those, you know, just so much fear around what the fallout would be from telling the truth, from telling my story, let alone from turning my story into my career and talking about it all the time, not just once. And the most beautiful thing happened when I started to open up, and opened up online, started to really claim my intimacy work and share the stories of my heartbreak and my healing. And I was afraid of what especially my mom was going to feel. I'm really close with her, and there were things I hadn't told her because I hadn't wanted her to worry. I had really kind of wanted to almost parent her or step in and protect. And sharing allowed us to step back into the role where she could take care of me again, in a way. And then I watched the most incredible thing happen as my work started to transform her too. And it was never an intention, of course, but I started to see how these little pieces of what I was learning and what I was teaching and feeling myself could sort of take on a life of their own and travel out. And suddenly, like, my dad's ex-girlfriend was messaging me that a blog post had impacted her, and just these kinds of, you know, we wonder what people are going to think far and wide in sort of a negative way, but I don't think we often give ourselves permission to dream about the ways our story could impact our family and actually serve them and inspire them. And not that I really recommend taking them on as clients, but, you know, trusting that you're doing work and your story's doing work, even if it does elicit a bad reaction at first. You know, you still don't know what seeds that just planted that might grow later into something really, really beautiful.
This is why we must speak. and share our story, we have no idea how far it will affect and the ripple effect goes. And I agree with you 100%. When you're fully stepping into who you are and without risk of judgment, fear of criticism, owning your story and sharing it so powerfully as a human being, as a flawed human being, that is when people start to pay attention and listen. That is when they start to think, that sounds like me. I could get through this. I could have a business based on sharing my story. That's a possibility. And so it's so powerful what you're saying. And I also want to just touch on quickly or briefly that when you share your story and you choose the details of what part of the story you're going to share, it's incredibly important that you're clear on what and why. And the reason I touch on that is because many speakers, people are walking around thinking they're telling their story, when in reality, they're not. And one of my friends and an amazing speaker from Speakers Who Dare and from the Speaker Salon, Amy O'Neill, she was in the Boston Marathon bombing. And she really wanted to talk about resiliency and trauma. And she was very separate from the experience as a speaker. I was at the bombing. She would just tell the story, and it was very much like I was at the store. And when I started asking her questions, and she then shared with me, as she was looking around trying to figure out what was happening, she looked down and her calves were burning. She didn't know why her calves were burning. And she realized that other human flesh had been blown off and hit her calves. So other flesh from the explosion was hot and was on her legs. Now, that is a story where people are going to lean in. And I'm not talking about being gruesome. I'm not talking about being inappropriate. I'm talking about her personal experience was so powerful. And that's what is really important when you're thinking about telling your story. And this is for the listeners and the viewers. Get clear on what parts of your story you're going to tell and why. And that moment where you were sharing with your listeners, Kimberly, what it was like to be alone in your apartment when the sun was setting. That detail, I got chills just a second. I'm getting chills again now. We've all been there. We've all been where it's quiet and we're alone and the sun is setting and we feel deep sadness and loneliness. That's so powerful.
Yes. I love that. And I so appreciate so many pieces of what you just said. But what comes to mind, and I wonder what y'all think about this, is the reclamation element as well of being the editor of the story. Not to say that we're going to embellish and lie or anything, but to say, you know, I choose this part to share and I choose this part to keep private. And I choose this narrative to really offer a window into where I've been. And especially for anyone listening who is a survivor of trauma, which unfortunately at this point is just about every human I've ever met, you know, the idea that you get to take the pen back and write this the way that it impacted you, but also share the pieces of it that you want to, and nothing more for now if you don't want to. And it may change later, but you know, that almost consent and control and being able to really say, like, this is the piece of me that I'm ready for everyone to see. And there may be some that I keep for myself, and that gets to be part of the story too.
You said this beautifully. Your story is your story, and you get to choose what part of it to share in order to have as much impact as possible. Kimberly, I want to thank you for being a featured guest today on The Big Talk. Where can our listeners get in touch with you?
Oh my gosh, this has just been such a pleasure as always. So my favorite place to connect is on social media. I'm Dr. Kimberly Rose Pendleton everywhere, especially on Instagram. I love to just share free resources there and connect, see what people are doing. And then KimberlyRosePendleton.com is where all of the recordings and blog posts and other just ways that people can get started if they are feeling like they want to go even deeper into their own intimacy work, which I obviously love, and I'm here for all of that.
Amazing. And we'll put all of this in the show notes.
I hope that you will start sharing your powerful story today, and be sure to subscribe and click on that notification bell so that you get access to my newest and latest videos. And I really appreciate that you are here and will always respond to the comments. Big love.